Welcome! This time on WoodWorks, we'll make this contemporary cherry wood wall mirror. So join us! Hello, I'm David Marks. Welcome to WoodWorks. This wall mirror, with its circular frame, hidden joinery, and decorative keystone accents, represents the spirit of contemporary woodworking. The cherry wood frame, in the shape of a perfect circle, reflects the beauty and symmetry of nature. The wenge accents, cut in a classic keystone shape, direct your focus to the gleaming mirror, adding to the visual impact. This stylish looking glass will reflect fine craftsmanship in any home. There's some very interesting woodworking challenges that we'll take on while building this project. The perfect circle, the hidden joinery, and these wenge accents. We'll begin by making our solid cherry frame. Our first step will be to make a master template, which is 30 inches in diameter. We use some 1/2 inch MDF, which is approximately 31.5 inches square. We found our center point and extended the lines out to the edges. Now we'll take a compass and draw the circle. Our compass is set to make a circle with a 15-inch radius. Then we reset the compass to make a 12-inch radius and draw the inner circle. To cut the template, we use a router that's attached to a trammel arm. Our shop-made trammel arm is basically a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and this becomes the base for the router. We'll attach the trammel arm to the template using a screw in the center. We've also installed a 1/4 inch carbide spiral router bit. We'll just follow the arm around the template. Now it's a good idea to hold the template up off the work table. So we've added some double stick tape and some spacers to hold the template securely. And that'll ensure that we don't cut into the work table. The trammel arm keeps the router lined up and holds it in position as we cut the outer circle. To cut the inner circle, we reset the arm, moving it 3¼ inches towards the center. The extra 1/4 inch compensates for the diameter of the router bit. Here's our master template with layout marks in each quarter. This MDF machines so nicely we don't need to sand it. Now let's take a look at our frame stock. Now this is what I call a little bit of woodworking magic. We're going to take this 8-foot raw plank of solid cherry and turn it into this circle. Now to begin this transformation, we'll take this board and cut it into 4 2-foot lengths here at the radial arm saw. We want the grain to match all the way around the circle. So we want to mark each board in the order that we cut them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep them in that order as we make the frame. We'll cut this plank into 4 2-foot boards. Since we're cutting a rough plank, we'll have to mill the boards to get the faces absolutely flat and the edges to 90 degrees. We'll start by flattening one surface by running it over the knives of the jointer. Now with that surface flat, we can reference that face against the fence and run the edge of the board over the jointer. We'll deal with the opposite edge later. Before we run each board through the planer, we transfer the numbers of our boards onto the flat face we just jointed. We'll use that flat face as a reference to cut a parallel surface on the opposite side. We finish milling our boards by trimming the opposing edge parallel at the table saw. Now our frame pieces are ready. We have 4 boards that are 7/8 of an inch thick, 7 inches wide by 24 inches long. To continue our magical transformation, we'll join our 4 boards together with hidden joinery to make a 24-inch square. We'll take our template and use that to figure out where our 45-degree miter cuts will go to make a square frame. We want the joints to be at the 4 access points of the circle, and we want about 1/4 of an inch excess. The board should be centered between the 2 access points in our template, and we make lines to indicate our cuts. Since we're making a square, once we make the marks on one board, we can cut the other 3 exactly the same way. To cut each board, we use our miter jig at the table saw. When we're finished, we're left with 45-degree angle cuts on all 4 boards. Now we'll put it all together, making sure to line them up in the proper number order all the way around to match the grain and make sure it's square. We're ready now to make the joinery. We're going to be using splines and slots. We cut a slot on the end of each board at the router table using a 1/4 inch 3-wing slot cutter. This bit has a bearing that references against the wood, and once the height has been set, cuts a slot in the center of the stock. The splines are made out of solid cherry stock. It's important to cut them so the long grain of the splines match with the long grain of the frame. Now it's time to do our glue up. We dry fit it together first just to make sure everything fits together tightly. We'll apply some glue to the slots and the splines, and then we'll add even clamping pressure in both directions. We're using a scraper to remove the excess glue. Now we're ready to make this square into a circle. We'll set our template onto the frame and line up the layout marks with the joint lines. Then we'll trace the inner and the outer circles. At the bandsaw, we cut out the outer circle, being careful to cut it about 1/16 of an inch oversize. To cut out the inside circle, we use a jigsaw. Again, we cut it a little bit wide. We're using some double stick tape to attach our template onto our rough frame. We want to flush up the inside and the outside edges, and we'll do that right here at the router table. Referencing off the template, the router bit cuts and smooths the inside edges of the circle. With the same settings, we now smooth the outside edges of the frame. And there you have it. Our transformation is now complete. Our 8-foot cherry plank is now a perfect circle. Now let's cut the double rabbet in the back of the frame that will hold the mirror and the back panel. Let's take a look at our prototype. The mirror sits here, and the rabbet for it is 3/8 of an inch down from the back. The plywood back panel is 3/16 of an inch thick, and it will sit here. First we'll cut the rabbet for the plywood back because it's wider and shallower. We'll use a rabbet bit that has interchangeable bearings. The bearing controls the width of the rabbet cut. The small bearing rides along the edge of the frame, enabling the bit to make a shallow rabbet cut. To cut the rabbet for the mirror, we change the bearing on the bit. The wider bearing will make a smaller rabbet. The rabbet is only 1/4 of an inch wide, and to get the depth we want, we raise the bit to 3/8 of an inch. And then we carefully cut the second rabbet for the mirror. With our rabbets cut, our next step is to cut the cherry plywood back panel. We need to cut a circular piece that's going to be 25 inches in diameter, 24 inches across, plus a 1/2 inch on both sides to accommodate the rabbets. We make the back panel the same way we made our frame. First, we'll make a template out of MDF. On a square piece of MDF, we find the center point, and then use a compass to draw a circle with a 12.5-inch radius. Next, using our trammel arm, we cut out the template with the hand router. Then, we transfer our circle onto a sheet of 1/4-inch cherry plywood. At the bandsaw, we cut out the circle about 1/4 inch oversize. And then, at the router table, with the MDF template attached to the cherry plywood, we flush trim the edges. We sanded the edges a bit to make sure that we'll get a snug fit. That looks nice. Now we're ready to make the wingy accents and cut the notches that they'll fit into. These Keystone Accents made of wingy are classic arch ornaments. They provide a strong visual impact to our circular frame, as well as focus your attention into the mirror. As part of our design, we wanted a keystone shape that would sit into a notch and rest flush with the mirror. So after some trial and error, we came up with a design that we liked. A shape that flares from 3 inches to 5 inches and extends 1/4 inch on both sides of the frame. From those specifications, we created our Keystone template. Then we had to answer the other creative question, how will it be attached? We decided to route a recess or a notch on top of the joint, much like an inlay. So we used our template to make a jig. We made a router jig out of MDF, and we used a flush bearing bit to cut a notch 3/16 of an inch deep into the frame. We added some layout marks for the center line and for the outside and the inside edges, and finally on the back we added some double stick tape and a stop block to match the curve of the frame. We route out the recess with our plunge router, making cuts in a clockwise motion, slowly notching out the stock. We milled up some blocks of wingy, 3/4 of an inch thick, 5.5 inches wide, and 5 inches long. Now when you cut your keystones, you want to make sure they all match. So be sure to keep the grain running in the same direction, which is lengthwise on the keystone for aesthetics. We need to cut away most of the inside face of the keystone so it will sit inside the notch. But when we cut it, we want to leave a portion on the end to create a lip that will hang over the edge and sit against the mirror. We make the first cut at the bandsaw. With our wingy stock positioned against the fence, we make a 4-inch long cut. The stop block ensures the length of the cuts are all the same. Next, we take our wingy to the table saw. With the blade raised 1/4 inch, we make a perpendicular cut to remove the stock. Now it's time to cut the flares on our wingy accents. Let's take a look at our prototype. We ended up with a flare that's 19 degrees, and you can see that our accents overhang the edge of the frame. Now when you cut the flare, make sure that you don't cut all the way out to this corner. Make sure that you leave enough material for 1/4 inch overhang. Now I'll make these cuts with a miter gauge. We've set the gauge at 19 degrees off center because that's the angle of our flare. We cut the flares on all 4 pieces on the right side of the blade. Then we reposition the mitering gauge on the left side of the blade and set the gauge at 19 degrees in the opposite direction. And then cut the flares on the other 4 sides. This is what I call a cut-fit process. It might take a few times and a few tries to get it just right. But once you get one that fits, flip the frame over with the accent in place, and then take a compass set to 1/4 inch and scribe a mark where you'll make the trim cuts for the overhang. At the bandsaw, we fine cut the curved overhang to 1/4 inch. It's a good idea when you're working with a dark wood like wingy to add some green tape to highlight the cut. Then we finish off our Keystone Accents by softening the inside and outside edges with some sandpaper. Before we glue on the keystones, we'll add one last design touch to our frame. We'll use the plunge router and an 1/8" radius bit to round over the edges of the frame. We've cleaned up the frame using a scraper and some sandpaper. Now we're doing the glue up. We're using some yellow glue, and we put some in the notches and on the keystones. Now we'll finish clamping it up and let the glue set for a few hours. We had our mirror cut at a glass shop out of 3/16 of an inch thick stock. We specified the diameter, and they guaranteed it to within 1/16 of an inch. We checked the fit, and it looks great. Now we're going to drill the pilot holes for the screws that will hold the back panel. Using a hand drill, we drill the pilot holes with a 1/16 inch bit. And we use a countersink bit to prepare the screw holes. Once we set the mirror in place, we slide in the back panel and secure them both with brass screws. Our wall mirror is almost complete. It only needs the finish. We use my favorite finish. It's a blend of tung oil, linseed oil, and polyurethane. We'll hand rub in several coats, and that'll really let the beauty of the wood shine through. Now, it's a good idea to take the mirror out before you put the finish on. This tung oil mixture is an excellent way to highlight the natural grain and color of the wood. It will take about 4 coats to give our wall mirror a great looking, durable finish. It's the combination of materials and design that give this wall mirror its bold character. The warm circular cherry frame with the rich wingy accents come together to create a mirror frame that reflects both strength and contemporary style. This wall mirror invites one to stop and take a peek at nature's perfection. This wall mirror will weigh about 25 pounds when it's finished, so take that into account when you buy the hardware to mount it. Also, make sure you mount it securely to the studs in the wall for safety, or use the appropriate sheetrock fasteners. I'm David Marks. Thanks for joining us.